Hi, everybody. Welcome back to AP Psychology with me, Miss Baines, your teacher, where you can take advantage of being able to pause and rewind me. Go ahead and grab those felt tip markers, get comfy, and don't forget those ever important binder notes that you're doing, which are Unit 5, Video 3, Storage. I'll see you on the other side. So as you can see from today's learning target, it outlines all the principles that underline the part of memory called storage, right? This is the storage of memory. How are we going to contain the memory? Where is it going to be contained, right? So that we can retrieve it or bring it back out, right? These are both very important things to know, right? So number one, how do we store information? And then also number two, where do we store it? First things first, remember there are three different main stores of memory. Okay, we have three types. Sensory memory, okay, that's our immediate sensory information. The working memory is the second one. Okay, the working memory is our more complicated short-term memory, right? That's like the waiting room model. Everyone's working on their papers. Right? Okay, so that's where we're bringing in the stuff back out from long-term memory, or we're putting things in there from the sensory, and everything's kind of being processed and enmeshed and melded together. Okay, this is our conscious thoughts. And then we have finally our third type, which is our long-term memory. Okay, that's back here. Okay, so where are these things stored? Where are the long-term memories that we have stored? We know that human beings have an unlimited capacity, right? We know that human beings have an unlimited capacity, right? It is estimated that we have a range from about 1,000 billion to 1 million billion bits of information in our long-term memory. So basically, we don't have any limits to how much we can store inside our brains, okay, inside our long-term memory. And this is much different from our short-term or our working memory, right? Our lucky number 7 memory, right? Lucky number 7 is the amount of information that we can store inside of our brain at any given time, plus or minus 1 or 2, right? Our long-term memory has no capacity. This is unlimited. We can serve as much as we need in order to keep all our thoughts locked inside where they're safe, okay? There's a story by a name of Rajan Mahavardhan, okay? He recited the first 31,817 digits of pi. That's a lot of numbers to hold and remember in your short-term memory. That's a really high number of things to be aware of at one time. Okay, so some of those memory techniques we're going to watch in a TED Talk video. But because there is no limit to how much we can store in our long-term memory, okay, it makes sense. So how well do you think you do with encoded and stored information? Let's take a little test. We're going to try and see if we can retrieve these long-term memories out of your head. Okay, let's go through a few examples of some semantic. The first one is a penny. Okay, which way does Lincoln face on the penny? Is it left or is he facing right? Which way is his profile facing? Hopefully you said to the right. Okay? Second, the American flag. How many red stripes and how many white stripes does an American flag have? Hopefully you remember that each represents one of the colonies, right? So there are 7 red and 6 white. How about pencils? Right? We see pencils every single day. How many sides? Envision a pencil in your head. How many sides do you think a wooden pencil has? If you had to guess. 6? Very good. How about the Statue of Liberty? Is she holding the torch in the left arm or the right arm? Hopefully you said, just like Abraham Lincoln, that she is using her right arm. Okay? Money. On the most popular denomination, $20 bill, who is the United States president that is fixed on the $20 bill? Hopefully you said bloody Andrew Jackson. All right. How about the back of a $20 bill? Hopefully you know that most money has a picture of the Capitol, right? The White House. Okay, so there are a few semantic type memories that you should have pretty much been able to, if not know the exact answer, you were able to take a pretty good educated guess, right? The point here is that unless you ever really looked at one of these things and paid attention to the details, you probably did not know whether or not each one of these things was what they were, even though you could envision the actual item in your head. Okay, you didn't really know the details or the semantics of them, but you could pretty much guess pretty well if you had to. There has been, since psychology has become a thing, right, and since we've mapped out the functionalities of the brain on the fMRIs, there has been a long standing research of where do memories live, right, inside of our brain. Where do the physical memories exist? And do they physically exist somewhere inside of our brain, even on the most minute or microscopic level? There have been two schools of thought, two different approaches about how memory is physically stored inside of our consciousness. Okay, so this first one is going to be the search for the engram, okay? The physical memory traces that our brain has based on our neurons or neurotransmitters, right? Where these long-term memories are coming from in the first school of thought is through our synapses. Remember synapses? Those are the little gaps between the dendrite tips, right, between the neurons. And so the idea here is that through these synapses, we can find the physical memory trace within the nerve cells, right? Remember, a neuron is just a nerve cell. And when they're connecting to each other, right, there's this matter in between, these little crumbs, right? This chemical, electrical neurotransmitters. Okay? The other type is neural circuitry. This is how the parts of the brain are connected to each other in order to determine where our memories might be stored. Okay, so let's first look at the synapses in our long-term memory. Some psychologists believe, and have come to the conclusion of, is that when you're forming memories, that we have a when we have a new memory that is being created, each memory is encoded and leaves behind a little electrochemical breadcrumb of sorts. Okay? And these little chemical traces of breadcrumbs, these neurotransmitters, over time, the more and more that we use the memory, the more and more we think actively with the memory, right? The ones that we recall over and over again, if we keep going back to them, they get stronger and stronger and bigger and bigger. And when they're hooked up to the fMRI, brighter and brighter, right? So the idea here is that the more we use our brain, the more we use our neurons, or neurotransmitters, the stronger the little trail of the memory. This explains when you're hit in the head or you get an electric shock, how you can lose some of your recent short-term memory because they haven't yet cemented or consolidated yet, right? Those memory trails are still being formed through the synapses, okay? So we also call this long-term potentiation. Long-term potentiation is the idea that over time, the neurological synapses are used over and over again for that same memory, okay? So it's the same idea that we need to encode. And once we use them over and over and over again, they will become stronger and stronger and stronger. Think of it this way, okay? Imagine you're walking through a field, okay? A field. And there's some leaves and some grass on the field. But other than that, there's trees everywhere. And you're not really sure where's what. You need to get through the woods to the other side where your house is. Your trail going for the very first time is going to be very weak, right? There will be very little evidence of it. Maybe there'll be some leaves scattered. The grass will be pressed down in the areas that you walked through. Maybe you snapped a few branches going through different ways. Okay, so the evidence is not strong that somebody walked through from one end to the other. However, if you were to go back again the next day, and then the next day, and the next day, and the next day after that, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day after that, eventually a path would start to emerge. Finally, after about a month of going back and forth, you would see a clear, rich, brown path, right? The path well taken. All the leaves are gone. All the grass has been pressed away, pressed down so much that it finally disappears, until finally a dirt trail appears. You'll find your way home every time. And the theory is that neurotransmitters are just like that. When we have rich, beautiful, strong memories, our neural pathways are equally abundant. We have many, many, many more neurotransmitters in between those synapses. Okay, so different memories and how they are connected to different parts of the brain. It's going to be determined by whether or not we lose certain memory stores, okay? So what they did was they studied when they looked at individuals who have had parts of their brain either removed, right, during a surgical procedure, had purposeful lesions or cuts into the brain, operations, or head injuries or accidents, right? And they went and looked at the activity that was going on in the brains. Our most famous example, hopefully this is sounding familiar, was the example of HM, okay? So HM had his hippocampus and his amygdala removed on both sides of his brain in order to control his epileptic seizures, okay? So once he had these removed, his seizures went away like that. However, he could no longer create new memories. He was having trouble having conversations and remembering one day to the next. He wasn't able to interact with other people socially. He was forgetting everything from day to day. He could still remember the stuff when he was little and his past, right? He had long-term memories, but he could not create any new memories. What the idea is here is that we need those connections between the hippocampus and the amygdala in order for us to form new memories, right? His was removed. Logic would tell us that means the rest of us are using them for those short-term memories in order to encode and store them into our long-term memory, okay? So that's the idea here. Okay, let's take a look at the different parts of the brain. Remember this guy? Okay, the different parts of the brain that are involved in memory, we know first of all is our prefrontal cortex, okay, our frontal lobe. Our frontal lobe is involved in the sequence of events, right? Prefrontal cortex is going to be kind of like our decision-making, personality, logical thinking, higher ordered thinking, abstract thinking, okay? So all the sophisticated stuff that we're able to do is all in the front here, okay? For actually storing the events, right? So the prefrontal lobe isn't actually storing the memories. It's more about it's doing the memorizing, right? It's a part of the brain that is actually, so the prefrontal lobe isn't actually storing the memories. It's more about doing the memorizing, right? It's a part of the brain that is actually making the memories, okay? That's where that's happening. So it's not helping us to remember what happened, but to remember the sequence of the events. What came first, and then what came next, and what came last, okay? The amygdala, we know, deals a lot with emotions, okay? So it's going to be where all our fight or flight or fear responses are stored, okay? So our amygdala helps us to encode emotional aspects of memory. Those emotions that you're feeling during a making of a emotionally type flashbulb memory, for example, okay? Next we have over here the medial, up at the top of the brainstem, the medial temporal lobe, which you can't actually see in the picture. It's behind here, it encodes and transferring the new explicit memories into the long-term memory, okay? We're going to talk about explicit and implicit memories in a few minutes. But right now, I want you to notice that the hippocampus is the part of the brain that encodes and transfers our new explicit memories, okay? The explicit memories to our long-term memory. So our hippocampus and our medial temporal lobe basically are doing the same thing. They're helping us to learn the new explicit memories, okay? So the stuff that we learn, okay? Finally, our cerebellum, which is at the back of our head, remember, it controls our movement, our balance, our muscle memory, the way that our body moves, our proprioception, our where we are in the world spatially, okay? All of that movement stuff, okay? The cerebellum helps us to store all of that stuff that we were doing, all of those activities of movement, okay? So those are the major structures that we just talked about. Here is a kind of bullet list of them. The hippocampus is going to be the one that aids in the initial encoding of information. This is like kind of the first stop for all memories. And then they get sent to their other places in order to be remembered in the long-term memory. Okay, and then our supreme cerebral cortex are where our memories are changed into relatively permanent ones, okay? Our supreme cerebral cortex is where the long-term memory gets cemented, okay? They're processed and then they're sorted to different places. The amygdala strengthens the memories and gives us an emotional connection or strong emotional association, and those are our flashbulb memories, right? Those emotional memories that are tied to major events in your life, right? They serve as our aid for access when we're feeling certain emotion. Okay, we can bring back those memories easily. They're so cemented in our long-term memory. Quite frankly, that's probably what's responsible for persistent and troubling memories from post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So where do we store these memories? The idea is that the memories do not exist in only one place in the brain, but kind of all over the place, right? Different parts for different memories. Different parts of the same memory can also be stored in different parts of the brain, right? So it depends on the nature and the material that is being learned, right? Information storage appears to be linked to the sites of the brain where the processing of the information occurs. So if it's vital information, the information will be stored in the visual cortex, okay? Okay, so again, those emotions are being controlled by the amygdala, right? So we talked about this in another unit, okay? So stress. How does stress impact our memory? Okay, stress hormones. Remember the endocrine system? How does stress impact our memory? Well, if we have a heightened emotion, which is usually caused by stress, it makes actually for stronger memories. Stress seems to boost our activity in the memory chambers, okay? So where the memory forming areas are, if there's stress involved and people are really under pressure, that whole part of the brain is going to be lit up, right? That's why people say they work well under the gun or under pressure. They can take a test better when they're under pressure, right? Because that stress that you're feeling is actually helping you to focus and create memories, right? It's why we remember a lot of things that are stressful in our life and we're distracted by them and they're easy to retrieve. Not so much, right, with the really relaxed, zen, chilled out moments, right? We might have a lot of those in our lifetime, but we don't remember them so vividly. However, a continued lengthy, stressful situation, right, can actually alter or disrupt our memory. Okay, so let's talk about the difference now between implicit and explicit memories. Implicit memories are memories that you are not even consciously aware, of, right? However, memories can affect your behavior. So an example might be when my daughter was about, 4 or 5 years old, she got bit by this big black kind of hairy beast of a spider. She had a spider bite and she freaked out and it hurt and she cried and it was very traumatizing for her, all right? It all happened, like I said, when she was like 4 years old. She's not actually able to recall the event, right? The actual memory of the spider crawling on her and it biting her and her seeing it and all of that. However, as she gets older, she still has a heightened fear of spiders because she has an implicit memory of the event, right? The fact that it happened. She's not consciously aware of the details of what caused the fear, but she can remember that she's afraid of them, right? That's an implicit memory. It's part of our latent or stored or our deep memories. As we're just going through life, we collect these things that happen to us, things that we go through, right? Those are all implicit memories. We don't have to tell ourselves that that hurt to get bit by the spider, right? You automatically remember it because it was traumatic. These are also things like brushing your teeth, right? You don't think about each and every day and remember every time you brushed your teeth. Of course not, but you know how to do it, right? You know how to boil water. You know how to use a microwave just intuitively. How you know that a steering wheel going left is going to make the car go left, right? We can do all these things without even thinking about it. Walking and chewing gum, riding a bike. However, most of these memories, these procedural memories, start out as explicit memories, right? They start out as explicit, and then we have to think about them, and they turn into these procedural implicit memories, right? Our exclusive memories. On the other hand, then, we have those intentional or the conscious recollection of information. Okay, so the procedural memories that start out as explicit, okay, they turn into implicit memories. The explicit ones are the intentional or conscious recollection of information that you are deliberately trying to remember something. And then we have to think about them, and they turn into these procedural implicit memory. Like brushing our teeth or putting one sock on and then the other and so on. Then we have those procedural memories that start out as explicit. The explicit ones are the intentional or conscious recollection of information that you are deliberately trying to remember something. Okay? Like, for example, after you've spent a summer at sleepaway camp, right? When someone asks you, what did you do for summer vacation, you're able to retrieve a whole series of explicit memories, right? What you did. Some other examples are remembering information that you've learned or studied, right? When you have to learn a formula or a grammar rule, or maybe you need to know what caused a war between two countries. And then when it's time to take a test, right, you explicitly recall it. Right? Eyewitness accounts of what happened. What were you wearing? Who were you with? What were they wearing? What were you talking about? What was the mood? Who was talking to whom? Right? The facts, like names, dates, all of that stuff, they require some sort of conscious mental effort of rehearsal to remember them. Okay? So, for example, if, let's say, you need to get somewhere without using a GPS system, okay, you're going to need to know things like, where is the sun in the sky? You know, if it sets in the west, that you can then tell which way is north, south, east, and west, right? When we're taking a test, you remember all the information that you study, and then the eyewitness accounts, okay? So some drama happened, and there's an incident, and somebody asks you to recall that incident. A declarative memory. There are two different types of declarative memories. We have our semantic memories. These are things like language, right? The facts, the trivia, the general knowledge, right? Who's the president? What are the 50 states? What are the capitals, right? All that stuff that you kind of learned in school, what we call rote learning, right? You had to do lots of rehearsals, lots of like studying, flashcards, stuff like that. The trivia, the general knowledge, stuff that you kind of learned in school, right? Who's the president? What are the 50 states? What are the capitals? Declarative memories that are episodic, right? So think of episodic as episodes, and your life is a movie series streaming, right? And your memories are episodic. So they're little stories. Little stories are strung together into bigger chunks and parts of your life. your toddler years, and then your childhood, and tween years, and then your teen years, and then adolescence, and then young adulthood, and then finally adulthood. So episodic then are more about memory of biographical details, right, about our individual lives. The stores of temporal coding, right, little time tags to identify when, and the context coding to indicate where. Okay, so temporal coding means when it happened, and the context coding or encoding is the where. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Have a great night. Bye now.